it leached my soul out from the place where souls are located and just ripped it away until it was ashes in the wind. Hi, welcome. How are you doing today? You doing well? Because, I'm not. So I just finished this trilogy. And I have been utterly ruined. Sorry if I'm a little distracted. My cat is in the other room trying to eat all of my plants. So I'm kind of running on an empty tank today because I finished Lightbringer yesterday. Today, I finished Lightbringer at 2:30 this morning, and I have recently turned 26, so 2:30 is way past my bedtime. I am an old woman at this point, and I'm exhausted, and I have not had caffeine yet. And I'm wrecked. Claire Legrand has wrecked me with this beautiful, terrifying trilogy. And I have a lot of feelings. So if you're into people just screaming about the books that they really like, please join me and watch as my head explodes as I try to put into words all of the emotions I felt over the past 3 or 4 days. I've started and reached the conclusion of this trilogy. So let's back it up just a little bit and talk about the Furyborn or the Empirium Trilogy as a whole. Furyborn came out in 2018, the next book, Kingsbane, came out in 2019, and the finale came out last year. And I kind of watched these publications pass by me. YA fantasy in general just hasn't been, YA in general, not just YA fantasy, hasn't been doing it for me for a while. Like I said, I'm 26 now, so I've been just more interested in prioritizing other things. Not that I still don't love YA fantasy, but I wanted to read a bit more stories that were a bit more reflective of my life experiences and the growing pains that I was going through. And I wasn't getting that in YA anymore. Haven't picked up a YA contemporary probably since graduate school. So 2018 was probably the last time I picked up a YA contemporary, and I've been slowly kind of weaning myself off of YA fantasy. The issue that I've been finding with that has been that I really like the fast-paced nature of YA fantasy, and a lot of the times in adult fantasy you don't get that. But I still love fantasy in general. I was just prioritizing other things. I've been reading a lot more romance and a lot more contemporary literature, and I started reading thrillers and horror and just expanding my reading horizons. So that's been really fun. And as a result, I've been not putting as much importance on the YA fantasies that I put on my TBR because I thought they were interesting, but because they were YA, I was not making them a priority. However, I finally this year decided, as kind of one of my reading goals, was that I was going to start prioritizing books that I actually wanted to read again. So I kind of looked at all of the things that were on my TBR and said, this, and this, these are all of the things that I'm going to read in the first quarter of the year. And Furyborn was one of them. I didn't think I was going to read it in January. However, Katie from Katie's Book Nook I was watching a video of hers, I forget which one it was, but I'll just link her channel down below. If you don't already follow her. She puts out really great content about books. And so she had posted a TBR where she was just talking about how excited she was for all of these books and that it's a really, really good series, and if you haven't read it, you should read it. And so I did. I put a hold on Furyborn at my library, kind of figuring that there would be a really long wait for it given the COVID situation and how long library holds have been kind of taking, at least for digital holds. However, I did notice that they had the physical book on their stores at my preferred location. So of course I had to jump on it. and there was no wait for it. I jumped on it and I devoured this in like one sitting. One frickin' sitting. If you don't know, Furyborn follows the rise of two girls in two different timelines. One is set in a timeline that's 1,000 years before present day, and then present day. And the story that follows these two girls is just a beautiful, terrifying, heartbreaking story of trial and error and finding yourself and being power mad for the sake of being power mad. I can't put into words how much I adored that first book. The series kind of feels like Throne of Glass in the beginning, where, you know, the two main girls, they really do remind you of Aelin. Also, like, in a really good way. Like, they espouse all of Aelin's really, really great qualities. And then I went on to obviously read Kingsbane because that hold was also available physically, so I went down and picked it up. Thank God for our libraries, right? And I enjoyed Kingsbane a lot. It was a really great continuation of the stories of all of the characters that you'd come to know and love. Although I did kind of feel like it suffered slightly from middle book syndrome, it also didn't suffer from it. And I know that's really confusing to kind of say, but bear with me. So Kingsbane didn't quite live up to the hype and the just amazingness. I have literally no words. I'm literally struggling to figure out how to describe this series. But it didn't suffer from an issue where the book wasn't good. It just wasn't as good as Furyborn. And while I still liked it and I still appreciated the kind of character development that we got out of it and plot development we got out of it, I felt like there could have been more. I mean, look at this big boy. You could have thrown in another like 30 pages and just that cliffhanger. So there is a male character in the story named Simon, and him and Ileana, who like I said, I didn't do a very good job describing this, but the girl who's in the present day timeline, or present day in the book timeline. Her name is Eliana, and he is obviously the love interest of this girl. Stuff happens with him that punched a hole in my heart. So now there is just a gaping wound in my chest where my heart should be. And that's all I'm gonna say on that book. So we end Kingsbane on a cliffhanger, and unfortunately for me, there is a very long hold on Lightbringer. So I do the only thing I know how to do, and that is run down to the bookstore immediately and get the next book immediately. This book ruined me. It ruined me. While Kingsbane left a gaping hole in my chest where my heart used to be, Lightbringer, on the other hand, it leached my soul out from the place where souls are located and just ripped it away until it was ashes in the wind. I'm going to insert a couple snippets here of screenshots from like my reading journal and some tweets and Goodreads where I just kind of chronicle the emotions of how I was feeling as I was feeling them. This was beautiful. It somehow simultaneously managed to tie everything together really well. And while some of the plot twists I was able to call from kind of the beginning, it was still a really enjoyable ride nonetheless. And also, I really loved how grand the concepts that were explored in this trilogy was. It felt a bit more beyond just your typical YA trilogy. For example, the concept of what's beyond death, I really, really enjoyed that was a concept that Riel was willing and yearning to find out. The development arcs of the characters as well, I feel like what I was lacking from a lot of adult fantasy was that kind of character development roller coaster that makes you really root and hate the characters in the same breath. And you definitely felt that. I mean, if you get two power-mad, power-hungry women that I think inherently is sort of engineered to make you feel uncomfortable, and while I personally didn't feel uncomfortable, I really liked that. One of my favorite aspects of the book was the fact that, or I guess of the trilogy, was that these characters, or some of these characters, were so power hungry simply for the sake of being power hungry, and that they were female to boot really just made me feel like some aspects of the story should have been a bit more villainous than they ended up being. Oh, also, it's a book about angels. I don't know whether I mentioned that. Like, one of the major plot devices in the book, and this isn't a spoiler, but it's about angels, kind of in the history of this trilogy's timeline, is that humans and angels had been at war with each other because angels were jealous of God's creation, and they're just these angels in this story are not, you know, those do-gooders that you are made to believe angels are. These angels are demons. They are really bad boys and girls. There are both. I don't know about you guys, but in 2013, I was really into like that hush hush fallen angel trope character plot device thing that was going around YA fantasy at the time, and I was all about it. I loved it. To me, it was the pinnacle of angsty teen romance, so I was all about it. Let's not get into the very specifics of this millennia-year-old angel being into this 16-year-old girl, but as a 13-year-old, I thought it was so entertaining. I don't know if that era of YA is something that I really want to re-explore, but I'm perfectly happy with what the Empirium Trilogy did with Angel. I love that they just had control over their own lives, and they could choose to be evil or they could choose to be good, and that was something that I think was reflected a lot in the rest of the characters. It was a really good discussion, thought-provoking discussion on humanity and what it means to kind of build your own life experiences and choose your own path, and not just doing something because it was foretold or because it was fate or destiny. So yeah, this is not a video I had meant to film today. I just had a lot of emotions that I think I just kind of needed to talk through. Also, if you've read this book, I would love to know what your thoughts on this is. I personally, based off of Claire Legrand's photo in the back of her book, I personally think that she looks like Hermione Granger if Hermione Granger was a Death Eater, and I mean that in the most flattering way imaginable, because only Death Eater Hermione could come up with a story that is this beautiful and this devastating and this just jaw-droppingly aching. Because I just yearned and I ached throughout the entirety of this whole trilogy, and I want to experience it again, but alas, I cannot, because the experience has already been had. So yeah, that is it from me. I apologize if this was a mess, because actually, no, I don't apologize. I am a mess. I am ruined, and I'm just going to sit for the rest of the day pretending to do work, when instead I am just going to stew in my love and obsession of this story and its characters. So please, if you haven't read it, read it. If you've read it, I would love to chat. So yeah, I hope you guys are well. I hope everyone has a great rest of their afternoon or morning or evening or whenever you are watching. Just thank you for joining me and bearing with me as I sorted through all of this. Bye.